My husband threw me a surprise 40th birthday just to announce his divorce. He didn't know my plan will hit him hard. The ballroom was filled with the smell of expensive lilies and the sound of fake laughter. I stood there in my favorite silk dress, feeling like a queen at 40. My husband, Mark, stood beside me, his hand resting on my lower back. He clinked his crystal glass against a spoon, and the room went silent. He looked at me with a smile that I used to think was full of love. He called me the center of his world and the reason for his success. Then, he leaned in close to my ear. His breath smelled like expensive cologne and bitter lies. "Happy birthday, Jordan," he whispered so softly that only I could hear. "I am leaving you. The divorce papers are inside your gift box on the table. Don't make a scene and embarrass yourself." He pulled away, grinning at the crowd. He handed me the microphone, expecting me to break down and cry in front of everyone. Instead, I gripped the mic and smiled back. My hands were steady as I walked over to the large, silver gift box. The entire room was watching me, waiting for a birthday speech. Mark stood off to the side, crossing his arms with a smug look on his face. He really thought he had destroyed me. I pulled off the ribbon and opened the lid. There it was, a thick manila envelope labeled "Dissolution of Marriage." My heart felt like it was being squeezed by cold hands, but I didn't let a single tear fall. As I pulled the papers out, I noticed a small yellow sticky note stuck to the back of the last page. It was a messy scribble from his lawyer. It said, "She doesn't know about the offshore account yet. Do it fast before the acquisition closes." My blood turned to ice. He wasn't just leaving me, he was trying to rob me of everything we had built together over 20 years. Subscribe for more revenge stories to see how I handled this. I looked away from the papers and scanned the crowd of faces. That is when I saw her. Tiffany was standing near the bar, looking far too smug for a work assistant. She was 24, half my age, and wearing a diamond necklace that Mark told me he had lost months ago. She was glowing, her hand resting protectively over her stomach as she looked at my husband like he was a prize she had finally won. She wasn't just my protégée at the office, she was the woman who had been sleeping in my bed while I worked late to fund Mark's dreams. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to my stomach. Tiffany caught my eye and didn't look away. Instead, she gave me a slow, cruel wink and gently rubbed her belly again. She wanted me to know that she wasn't just taking my husband, she was starting the family he always told me he wasn't ready for. Before I could speak, the lights dimmed and a giant screen lowered behind the stage. Mark had promised a slideshow of our best years as a birthday surprise. But as the photos started playing, the room went uncomfortably quiet. These weren't beautiful memories. They were cruel, candid shots of me looking my worst. There was a photo of me sleeping with my mouth open after a 16-hour shift. There was another of me crying at my father's funeral, followed by a shot of me looking messy while gardening. Mark had chosen every photo to make me look old, tired, and broken. Meanwhile, every photo of him showed him looking like a young, successful bachelor. The humiliation was intentional and pointed. Suddenly, the projector glitched. A photo flashed onto the screen that clearly wasn't supposed to be there. It was a high-quality picture of Mark and Tiffany tangled together in our master bedroom. The guests gasped, and the silence became deafening as the truth hung in the air. The drive back to our mansion was the longest silence of my life. When we stepped inside, I saw that half of the master closet had already been cleared out. Mark didn't even try to apologize. He stood in the hallway, looking at me with pure disgust. He told me that he had already changed the security codes and that I had exactly 30 days to vacate his house. He laughed when I mentioned our 20 years of marriage. He called me expired goods and said he needed a woman who actually matched his status, not a tired old lady who reminded him of his struggling years. He grabbed his suitcase and headed for the door, but he stopped and smirked. He told me he left a little something under the bed to help me cope. Later, I reached under the frame and found a hidden recording device. He wanted to catch me crying and breaking down so he could use it against me in court. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the small recording device. My mind drifted back to 10 years ago, when we had nothing but a cramped apartment and a dream. I worked 2 jobs, pulling double shifts at the hospital and waitressing on weekends, just to put Mark through his expensive MBA program. When he wanted to start his first tech company, I didn't hesitate. I sold the small house I had inherited from my grandmother, the only thing I truly owned, to give him the seed money. We were supposed to be a team. I was the silent engine that kept his life running while he played the role of the visionary. I spent my youth building an empire that he now claimed was entirely his. I realized then that while I was building a future for us, he was busy building an escape hatch for himself. Every sacrifice I made was just another brick in a wall he used to shut me out. I realized I couldn't trust anything Mark had ever given me to sign. I went to my home office and dug through the safe until I found our original business contracts. There was one document I remembered signing years ago, right when his first big success happened. At the time, I was so tired from working and managing the household that I had barely skimmed the pages. I trusted him completely. Now, looking at it with older, wiser eyes, I saw a clause that made my breath hitch. It was written in tiny, legal jargon, but the meaning was clear. I had signed away my rights to the intellectual property of the main software in exchange for future dividends that were never defined. It was a trap laid a decade ago. Mark had been planning his exit strategy since the very beginning. He didn't just fall out of love. He had been a predator in my home for 10 years, waiting for the right moment to strike. I needed professional help, so I called my oldest friend, Elena, who was a top forensic accountant. We met in secret at a small diner across town. I handed her the gift box papers and told her about the note I found. Elena looked through the documents for 20 minutes, her face turning from confusion to a dark, angry grin. She laughed softly and shook her head. "Jordan, he is a bigger snake than I thought," she whispered. She explained that Mark was rushing the divorce because a massive $20 million acquisition of his company was set to close next month. He wanted me officially gone before the papers were signed so the money would be considered his separate property. If the divorce became final this coming Tuesday, I would walk away with almost nothing. But if I could delay the process by even a few weeks, the law would see that money as a marital asset. I owned half of that $20 million. The next evening, Mark came home acting strange. He wasn't cold or mean like he was at the party. Instead, he tried to act guilty and soft. He brought a bottle of expensive wine and spoke about how amicable he wanted this to be. He sat next to me on the couch and tried to use the old chemistry that used to exist between us. He kissed my neck and told me that we didn't need to involve messy lawyers. He pushed the divorce papers toward me, offering a pen and a small cash settlement if I just signed tonight. It was intoxicating and disgusting all at once. I could smell his fake regret. As he pulled away to pour more wine, his shirt shifted. I saw a fresh, deep scratch on his back that definitely wasn't from me. The sight of it made me want to scream, but I kept my face blank. He was literally trying to seduce me into poverty. My own lawyer called me an hour later with a terrifying warning. She had discovered that Mark was playing a very dirty game behind the scenes. He had filed a secret motion with the court claiming that I was mentally unstable and had a history of substance abuse. He was trying to void the infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement, which would have cost him millions if he was caught cheating. He had been gaslighting me for months, moving my things and telling me I forgot where I put them, all to build a case that I was losing my mind. Just as I hung up, my sister, Sarah, called me. Her voice sounded strange and distant. "Jordan, Mark told me you're having a complete mental breakdown," she said. "He said you're dangerous to yourself. Maybe you should just sign those papers and go to a retreat to get better." My own blood was starting to turn against me. The betrayal from my own sister felt like a knife in my lungs. I sat in the dark kitchen, wondering how Mark had turned Sarah against me. I decided to check her business bank records, since I still had access to the family accounting software. I found the answer within minutes. Mark had been donating large sums of money to Sarah's struggling boutique for the last 6 months. He had literally bought her loyalty with my own money. My sister wasn't worried about my mental health. She was protecting her peril. Later that night, I hacked into Mark's personal laptop using a password I guessed on the third try, the date he started his company. On his desktop, I found a hidden folder titled Sarah, Disposal Plan. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked it open. It wasn't about my sister Sarah. It was about me. It was a step-by-step guide on how to erase me from his life and the company forever. The disposal folder was a nightmare come to life. It contained dozens of photos of me taking my daily vitamins in the morning. Beside the photos were digital receipts for heavy sedatives and lethargy-inducing drugs. I realized with horror that Mark had been swapping my supplements with medication designed to make me look confused, tired, and crazy in public. He had been drugging me for 3 months to ensure that any witness in court would describe me as unstable. This was why I had been feeling so foggy and forgetful lately. I wasn't losing my mind or getting old. I was being chemically manipulated by the man who slept beside me. I looked at the bottle on the counter and felt a wave of nausea. He was a monster, and he was recording every second of my downfall to show the judge. Hit subscribe for more revenge stories because the fight was just beginning. I knew I had to act fast, so I decided to give Mark exactly what he wanted to see. I began my performance the next morning. I put on a show of being completely distraught and broken. I walked around the house in a stained robe, muttering to myself. When Mark came home, I put on a grand finale. I cried, I screamed about nothing, and I accidentally smashed a crystal vase against the fireplace. I watched out of the corner of my eye as Mark stood in the doorway, hidden by the shadows, holding his phone up to record my breakdown. He was smiling, clearly thrilled that his plan was working. What he didn't know was that I wasn't just breaking the vase out of anger. As I cleaned up the shards, I was actually hiding a micro camera inside a piece of decorative wood on the mantel to record him. The next day, I followed Tiffany after she left the office. I expected to see her shopping or going to a spa, but she drove to a quiet restaurant on the outskirts of the city. I watched from my car as she met with a man in a sharp gray suit. I recognized him immediately. He was the CEO of Mark's biggest corporate competitor. This wasn't just a simple affair born of lust. Tiffany wasn't just a mistress, she was a plant. She was the daughter of the man who wanted to destroy Mark's company. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a corporate merger happening in my own bedroom. I saw her hand the man a USB drive, and they laughed together. Then, the man leaned in and kissed her in a way that looked much more than professional. Mark was being played just as hard as I was, and he had no idea. On Thursday, Mark served me with a final notice through his lawyer. He didn't even use a process server. He handed it to me himself with a look of pure disgust. He told me that if I didn't sign the divorce papers by Friday afternoon, he would have me involuntarily committed to a psychiatric ward for an evaluation. You're 40, Jordan. You're done, he sneered, looking at me like I was a piece of trash on the sidewalk. You're dead weight. It's time to let the grown-ups play with the big money. He felt so powerful, so untouchable. I looked at him, pretending to tremble, and reached for the documents. I picked up a pen from the table and tried to press it to the paper, but I stopped. The pen is out of ink, Mark, I whispered, my voice shaking. He groaned in frustration and turned to find another one, giving me the time I needed while Mark searched for a working pen. I slipped into the study and pulled the original incorporation papers I had retrieved earlier. I had spent the night digging into the fine print of the company's birth. Because I had funded the entire startup with my inheritance from my grandmother, there was a silent founder clause that Mark had completely forgotten about in his greed. The clause stated that as the primary investor of the initial capital, I held a permanent seat on the board and veto power over any sale of the company for 20 years. I wasn't just his wife who helped out, I was technically his boss and the majority stakeholder in the shadows. He had spent years building his image as a self-made man, but the paperwork proved he was nothing without my signature. I realized I held the power to stop his $20 million deal with a single phone call. That evening, a massive industry gala was announced on the news. It was the event of the year where Mark was set to receive the Entrepreneur of the Year award. He planned to use the stage to debut Tiffany as his new fiancée and announce the huge acquisition of his company. It was supposed to be his crowning moment, the night he finally stepped into the life he wanted without me. He didn't even bother to hide the invitation on the counter. He thought I was too drugged and broken to even care. However, a second invitation arrived in the mail an hour later. It wasn't from Mark, and it wasn't a guest pass. It was a formal summons from the board of directors. They had seen the leak I sent about the company's ownership and wanted the real founder to be present for the vote. Mark tried one last time to scare me into signing the papers that night. He staged a terrifying break-in at the house while I was home alone. He had hired 2 men to smash the back windows and throw things around, hoping I would flee the house in a panic and leave the signed documents behind on the table. He wanted me to be so afraid that I would do anything just to get away. I heard the glass shatter and the heavy footsteps downstairs, but I didn't run. I sat in the dark at the top of the stairs, perfectly still. I waited for them to realize I wasn't moving. I held the remote to the security system that I had secretly rewired. When they reached the landing, I didn't scream. I simply turned on every light in the house and revealed I was holding a surprise of my own. The burglars fled as soon as they realized I wasn't a victim, but I wasn't finished. I decided to start planting seeds of doubt in Tiffany's mind. I sent her an anonymous bouquet of dark red roses at the office the next morning. Tucked inside was a simple, chilling note. He did it to me at 40. He will do it to you at 30. Check the Sarah disposal folder on his computer. I knew her curiosity would get the better of her. If she saw how coldly he planned to get rid of a woman who gave him 20 years, she would realize her pregnancy wouldn't protect her for long. An hour later, my phone rang. It was a restricted number, and I could hear Tiffany screaming at Mark in the background. The perfect, golden couple was starting to show deep, ugly cracks. Their loyalty was built on money, and money is a very shaky foundation. By Friday morning, I had filed a massive spousal maintenance claim through a different law firm. I didn't just ask for a small monthly check. I asked for an amount so high that it legally froze all of Mark's liquid assets until the hearing. This included the secret funds he was using to pay off my sister and the expensive lifestyle he was promising Tiffany. Mark stormed into the house an hour later, his face purple with rage. He was livid because his corporate credit cards had been declined at lunch. "What have you done, you crazy bitch?" he screamed, throwing his briefcase across the room. I looked him directly in the eye, appearing perfectly sober and sharper than I had been in years. "I am just doing what you told me to do, Mark. I am taking care of myself." I calmly offered him a glass of wine to cool down. Mark grabbed the glass from my hand and drank it in one greedy gulp. He was too angry to notice the slight tremor in my fingers. As he set the glass down, I leaned against the counter and smiled. "That is the same stuff you have been putting in my vitamins for 3 months, Mark," I said quietly. His eyes widened, and he looked down at the empty glass in horror. I watched as the color drained from his face. "Don't worry," I added. "It won't kill you. It just makes you feel confused and sleepy, right? Exactly how you wanted me to feel in front of the judge." He tried to lunge toward me, but his legs already felt heavy. He stumbled against the table, gasping for air. He realized in that moment that I wasn't his victim anymore. I was his mirror, reflecting all his cruelty back at him. Later that night, my sister Sarah came to the door, crying uncontrollably. Mark's secret payments to her had stopped because of the asset freeze, and her boutique's rent was 3 months overdue. The bank was threatening to seize everything she owned by Monday morning. She fell to her knees, begging me for a loan, swearing that she only listened to Mark because she was desperate. She tried to tell me she still loved me and that blood was thicker than water. I looked down at her and felt nothing but a cold, hard emptiness. She had been willing to help him and drug her own sister for a few $1,000s. "The price of the truth just went up, Sarah," I told her. I made her sit down and write a full, notarized confession about Mark's bribes before I even considered helping her. I wasn't her sister anymore. I was a creditor. The pressure was mounting on Mark from all sides. I decided to leak a rumor to the tech press that the company's silent founder was filing for a complete forensic audit due to suspected fraud. Within 2 hours, the news was everywhere. Mark's $20 million acquisition deal began to shake like a leaf in a storm. The investors were terrified that the company was built on lies. They didn't want a CEO who was embroiled in a messy, public scandal involving drugging and hidden partners. They demanded an emergency meeting with the real owner mentioned in the original papers. Mark spent the whole night pacing the living room, trying to call his lawyers, but no one was answering his calls on a Friday night. His golden future was turning into a pile of ash, and he had no way to stop the fire. On the eve of the gala, I went shopping for a new identity. I bought a designer dress that cost more than Mark's first car. It was a deep, crimson red, the color of blood and victory. I wasn't going to his party to hide in a corner or beg for my marriage. I was going to host the funeral of his career. I spent the evening at a luxury hotel, getting my hair and makeup done until I looked like the powerful woman I used to be before Mark started shrinking me. At exactly 2 a.m., I sent one final message. I sent a recording of Mark trashing Tiffany, the one where he called her just a distraction and disposable, directly to her phone. I wanted her to have a very long night of thinking before she walked onto that stage beside him. The night of the gala arrived. The grand ballroom was buzzing with the most powerful people in the industry. Mark was already on stage, standing behind the podium, looking nervous but trying to maintain his Entrepreneur of the Year smile. He started his speech, talking about his hard work and his vision for the future. Just as he reached the part where he was going to announce the big merger, the heavy double doors at the back of the room swung open. I walked through the center aisle, the heels of my shoes clicking loudly against the marble floor. Every head in the room turned. The whispers started immediately. I didn't look like a deadweight wife or a woman having a breakdown. I looked like a queen coming to reclaim her throne. I walked straight up the stairs, onto the stage, and took the microphone right out of Mark's hand. I stood center stage, the spotlight blindingly bright. Mark tried to grab the microphone back, his face a mask of panicked fury, but I stepped away with a grace I hadn't felt in years. I didn't scream or cry. Instead, I thanked the audience for the surprise birthday divorce my husband had planned. "Mark thinks I'm a silent partner," I said into the silence, "but tonight, I'm sharing the real vision." I signaled to the tech booth where I had planted my own USB drive earlier. Suddenly, The Sarah disposal plan files were projected onto the giant screen behind us for everyone to see. The crowd saw the photos of the pills, the receipts for sedatives, and the spreadsheets detailing how he planned to defraud his investors. The gasps from the front row were like music to my ears. The investors looked at Mark with horror as they realized he was a criminal, not a genius. The humiliation was just beginning for him. Tiffany stood up from her seat in the front row, but she didn't move to defend Mark. Her eyes were red from crying all night after hearing the recording I sent her. She walked slowly up the stairs, her heels echoing in the quiet room. Mark reached out to her, pleading with his eyes for her to play along. Instead, she swung her hand back and delivered a stinging slap that echoed through the speakers. She didn't say a word. She simply reached into her clutch, pulled out her phone, and connected it to the ballroom's Bluetooth system. Within seconds, the entire room heard Mark's voice booming over the speakers, calling Tiffany a distraction and utterly disposable. The Entrepreneur of the Year award sat on the podium, but everyone knew it was already revoked. Subscribe for more revenge stories. The police were already on their way. The heavy doors at the back of the ballroom opened again, but this time it wasn't a guest. 4 police officers marched down the aisle toward the stage. They weren't there for me or the scene I was making. They were there because of the evidence I had delivered to the precinct that afternoon, the micro-camera footage of the staged break-in and the drugging evidence from my blood tests. Mark tried to run toward the side exit, but he tripped over the very wires he had set up for his grand presentation. The officers grabbed his arms and forced them behind his back. The clicks of the handcuffs were the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Mark was led out of the gala in front of all his peers, still wearing his expensive tuxedo, looking like a broken shell of a mun. The king had finally lost his crown in public. The gala turned into chaos, but I stayed perfectly calm. The board of directors called an emergency meeting in the VIP lounge immediately after the arrest. They were terrified of the legal fallout and the plummeting stock price. I sat at the head of the table, sipping a glass of water, while they argued about how to save the company. I reminded them of the morality clause I had tucked into the original founder's contract years ago. Because Mark had been arrested for a felony involving the company's founder, he was automatically stripped of his voting rights and his position as CEO. The board didn't have many options if they wanted the acquisition to go through. They looked at me, realizing I was the only one who actually knew how the business worked. They asked me to step in as interim CEO to save the deal. I returned to the mansion late that night. It was finally quiet, the air no longer heavy with Mark's lies. I didn't go to sleep. Instead, I spent the early hours of the morning packing every single thing Mark owned into black trash bags. I didn't carefully fold his expensive suits. I shoved them in with his gym shoes and old papers. I dragged all 20 bags out to the curb and left them there for the morning trash collection. As the sun began to rise, I sat in my office and opened the small floor safe hidden under the rug. I found a letter Mark had hidden at the very back, a secret plan for the $20 million acquisition. He thought he was so much smarter than me, but he always left a paper trail when he was proud of himself. It was a map to his final secret. The letter was a blueprint for his ultimate betrayal. It revealed that Mark had already managed to siphon off $5 million from the company's operating budget over the last year. He had hidden it in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, tucked away where no standard audit would ever find it. He thought he was being clever, but he was also arrogant. He didn't want to forget the access code, so he had hidden the digital key in the most sentimental place possible. The letter said the key was a digital code hidden within the custom-made 40th birthday card he had given me at the start of the party. He thought I would keep that card forever as a memory of the night he destroyed me. I ran to the trash can and pulled the card out. I peeled back the decorative lining and found a small thermal printout with a 16-digit code. 2 days later, I visited Mark in the county jail. He looked pathetic in his orange jumpsuit, his hair messy and his face covered in stubble. He started crying the moment he saw me through the glass, begging for forgiveness and claiming he was confused and pressured by Tiffany. He told me he still loved me and that we could fix everything if I just dropped the charges. I didn't say a word. I simply held up a printed bank statement from the Cayman account. His eyes went wide, and he stopped breathing for a second. I found the key in the card, Mark, I whispered. I moved every single cent into a private account in my name. You wanted to leave me with nothing, but now you're the one who is truly bankrupt. I stood up and walked away, leaving him screaming and banging on the glass behind me. Happy birthday to me, indeed. The fallout continued with my sister. Sarah came to my office, hoping that since Mark was in jail, I would just give her the money she needed to save her shop. She tried to hug me, but I stepped back and pointed to a chair. I told her that I had bought the building her shop was in, along with her business debt. I didn't give her the shop back for free. I made her sign a contract that turned her into my employee. She would have to work for me, starting from the very bottom as a junior clerk, to earn back the loyalty she had sold to Mark. She realized that I wasn't the sweet Jordan she could walk over or betray for a paycheck anymore. I was her landlord and her boss, and I would be watching every single move she made from now on. Tiffany didn't go away quietly either. She tried to sue me for emotional distress and claimed that I had ruined her reputation by playing the recording at the gala. She thought she could still win a settlement to fund her new life. I didn't even go to the mediation myself. I sent my legal team with a countersuit that detailed her involvement in corporate espionage with her father's company. I had the USB drive she had handed over at the restaurant, and I had the security footage of her meeting with Mark's competitor. The evidence was so overwhelming that her lawyers dropped her on the spot. She lost everything: her job, her reputation, and her father's support. She was forced to move back into her parents' basement, broke and disgraced, while the rest of the industry blacklisted her name forever. With Mark out of the way, I took full control of the acquisition deal. I met with the investors and showed them the real books, the ones I had helped build before Mark started his disposal plan. They were so impressed by my management and the truth about the company's origins that the deal didn't just stay at $20 million. The final acquisition went through for $40 million because the deadweight wife actually knew how to run the business better than the husband ever did. I sat in the boardroom, surrounded by the most powerful people in tech, and signed the final papers. I made sure to use the exact same gold pen Mark had tried to make me sign the divorce with. It felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. I wasn't just surviving, I was winning. The day of the final divorce hearing arrived, and the courtroom felt like a sanctuary. Mark sat at the defense table wearing a cheap, wrinkled suit his lawyer must have borrowed for him. He looked like a ghost of the man I once loved. I walked in wearing a tailored white suit and a confident smile that reached my eyes. The judge didn't take long to review the mountain of evidence I provided. Because of the infidelity clause and the criminal intent documents, the court ruled that Mark had forfeited his right to our marital wealth. The judge awarded me 90% of all shared assets, including the house, the cars, and the remaining business shares. Mark realized in that moment that he wasn't just losing a wife, he was becoming legally bankrupt. He looked at me with hollow eyes, finally understanding that his attempt to erase me had only succeeded in erasing himself. Once the papers were signed, I put the mansion on the market. It was a beautiful house, but it was filled with too many memories of a man who never really existed. I didn't need a sprawling estate to feel successful anymore. I bought a sleek, modern penthouse in the heart of the city, overlooking the very office building I now owned. The view was clear and bright, stretching out toward a future that belonged entirely to me. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I saw a man standing near the parking garage gate. It was Mark. He looked thin and unkempt, a far cry from the entrepreneur of the year. He didn't move toward me, he just stood there looking up at the building like a ghost haunting his own past. I got into my car and drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror. A few weeks later, Mark cornered me on a quiet street near my favorite coffee shop. He wasn't wearing designer labels anymore, he was wearing a uniform from a minimum wage delivery job. He looked desperate as he reached out to stop me. "Jordan, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I made a mistake. I was under so much pressure. I'm still the man you loved for 20 years. Give me a second chance to show you I can be better." I looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold clarity. "That man never existed, Mark," I said, my voice steady and calm. "He was just a character you played to get what you wanted. You weren't a husband, you were just a bad investment that I finally decided to sell." I walked past him, and he didn't try to follow. It had been exactly 1 year since that disastrous 40th birthday party. I decided to throw myself a new celebration in my penthouse. This time, there were no surprises and no hidden agendas. I invited my true friends, my loyal staff, and the people who had stood by me when things were falling apart. The room was filled with genuine laughter and the smell of good food. There was no slideshow of my failures, only a toast to the future. I stood on the balcony, looking out at the city lights, feeling a deep sense of peace. I raised my glass to new beginnings and felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around to see a handsome stranger smiling at me, holding a glass of champagne. He introduced himself and told me he admired my work. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone truly saw me. As the party continued behind me, I took a moment to reflect on the journey. Mark thought my 40th birthday was the end of my life, a shelf life he had decided for me. He didn't realize it was actually the end of his and the birth of the woman I was always meant to be. I didn't just survive a betrayal or a messy divorce. I conquered the world he thought he owned and built something even better. I learned that my value wasn't tied to a man's approval or a wedding ring. I am the architect of my own empire, and I am stronger than I ever imagined. Mark wanted to give me a surprise I would never forget, a moment of public shame and ruin. But in the end, I am the one who delivered the final, permanent knockout. Thank you. Please like, share and subscribe for more.